If he wanted to come back, whoever was in charge would tell him, okay, listen, you did your time like a fucking man. You did a lot of things in the life. You were a skipper at one time. You can come back. But deal with your nephew, John Jr. John Jr. cooperated. I have 302s and stuff like that. There's no doubt he cooperated. He even ratted on Angelo and a whole bunch of people. There's no doubt that he's a cooperator. So they would have told him, straighten that out first. And straighten it out first means kill him.
So today we're back with Sammy the Bull Gravano, and we're going to be talking about John Gotti and John Carniglia. First, let's discuss them individually. So, Sammy, when did you first become aware of John Gotti, and when did you first meet him?
I met him a long, long time ago. When I met John, I met John in 1977 in Frankie DeCicco's After Hour Club. And right after that, I met John Gotti. A little time after that, I met Johnny Carneglia. I met most of the guys he was with. From time to time, we bunked into each other. And I was already made. John got made, and we became closer. They came to my father's funeral. A gang of them came down, John and a whole bunch of them. And when my mother passed, same thing happened. So I, through the years, became a little closer and closer, especially when we all became friends of ours. I liked Jeannie a lot. I got along with him real good. I think he was the better part of the Gottis, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
Tough guy, good guy, man of his word. So I knew them rather well.
And what about John Carniglia? What was your first impressions of him?
Well, I already knew he was a tough guy, man's man, tough guy, did a lot of work. He was their workhorse. It was one of them. So I met him on a bunch of occasions. I did work with him myself. So I knew him real good.
And did you know his brother Charles? Because apparently he was a bit more crazy.
I did. I didn't know him personally. The first time I met him, I heard he was a whack job, and he was getting made. And I was in a room in a basement with John Gotti and myself and a whole bunch of other guys were going to get made. And he came in. It's the first time I actually saw him. And John said, look at this guy, he says. Bro, what does he think? This is a biker gang? He had rings on every single finger, from the thumb all the way across on both hands. He said, tell him to go get those rings off his hand. This isn't a biker gang. So I went over to him and I introduced myself to him. I knew he was his brother. He was getting made. And I said, listen, bro, take those rings off. Put them in your pocket. Do whatever you want with them. This is a ceremony for you to get made in the Mafia. This isn't a biker gang. Get those rings off. So he did. That was my first actual meeting and conversation with him. And I heard a lot of stories about him. I think he was like a half a serial killer. When he did a murder, he took things. Like if a guy had an earring, he killed the guy, he took the guy's earring and saved it. So he was taking things from dead bodies and saving things. A finger
like
from
trophy.
Somebody. That's real creepy. That's, it's one thing you're going to do a piece of work. It's a whole nother thing if you're enjoying it, number one. Number two, because I don't think a lot of hit guys, they don't enjoy doing it, but they do what they got to do. He seemed to enjoy it, and he seemed to, when you're hiding things and keeping memorabilia on somebody you killed, that's weird. And so I didn't have many conversations with him or anything to do with him too much, but he was dangerous.
John Carniglia is allegedly the man who put the fatal shots into Paul Castellano, famously in December 1985. In your book Underboss, you discuss how you met the hit team, I think it was the night before, Did you and John assign Carniglia to be the shooter of Castellano, or was it John, or did it just work out like that?
No, we assigned all four guys. It wasn't just John Carneglia. It
Yeah,
was four guys.
yeah,
And so we assigned all four of them would be the shooters, who would be the backup guys, where everybody would be. John Gotti would be my driver. I would be controlling the hit. I had a walkie-talkie, and they had a walkie-talkie. I would be controlling the hit. Frankie DeCicco would go in the restaurant. There was going to be a meeting with Paul Castellano, Jimmy Brown. A few captains were going to meet him. Danny Marino, Johnny Gamorano. There was a few guys who were going to be in there. So Frankie was going to be in there for that meeting. He was armed. Now, if they got up, they heard the shooting or whatever, he would tell them, sit the fuck down, and show them, open up his jacket, show them the gun. They're not stupid. They would immediately sit down, and that's what actually happened. Somebody came in, maitre d' or somebody came in and told them. Tommy Gambino was there too. He came a little late, but he came actually right after the shooting. He was
okay.
late for
But
the
with regards to the hit team, you didn't specifically say out the four, you two take out Bellotti, you two take out Castellano. Was that kind of left up to them?
No, two guys were going to be across the street because we knew exactly where they had to park the car. There was nowhere to park the car on the block. Right in front of Sparks, the spot was open because you would pull up, you give a guy who parks the cars, you give him your keys, he parks the car. So we knew he had to go in that spot. So Tommy was the driver. We had two guys across the street who would hit him, and we had two guys, Johnny Carneglia and another one who would hit Paul. And yeah, that was all set up. I was a backup shooter and I was controlling it. John was my driver. And there was 11 guys. Joe Watts was there.
Yeah.
Jeannie wasn't there. Gene Gotti. Eddie Lino and Fat Sally were there. There was 11 of us. And
Okay.
John said that, Bina was going to be a hit like this. It was his brother, and he wanted to exclude him, that he didn't have to be there. So we agreed with that. If something happened, you're losing two sons in a family. We gave him that. It's almost like a military thing. I saw that in the military. If there's two sons, you want to kind of separate them. You don't want a mother and father lose two sons in one battle. So we agreed to that. Angelo was there. So there was a lot of guys there, and everybody had a spot. We talked about it at night in my office in Brooklyn, and then I met them again near that park during the day, afternoon, before the thing took place. That's the first time I saw the jackets, the coats they were wearing, and the hats. They all had these Russian hats and these jackets.
Was that Angelo Ruggiero's idea? I think I read somewhere.
I really never knew whose idea. I thought it was a great idea when it happened. I didn't think about that before. Never thought about it. And it wound up being a great idea because after I cooperated, the Fed said there was hundreds of witnesses. Nobody, well, there's the panic of seeing something like this and they're running and everything is, but nobody had a good description of them, their height, their weight. Everybody, all their witnesses talked about the hat, the Russian hat, the jackets, stuff like that. There was a hooker or somebody who said John Gotti was one of the guys across the street. I guess the guys who were going to hit Tommy Bellotti. He was in the car with me. I told the agents that's not true. I'm not saying she was lying. Joe Watts was there. He's same height, built, salt and pepper hair. She may have made a mistake. So they threw her off as a witness once I testified.
So obviously a couple of years before that famous shooting, John Carniglia, Gene Gotti, and Angelo Ruggiero, and a few others, went on trial for a narcotics and racketeering charge. This would obviously then drag on throughout the 1980s. And eventually, I think it was in 1989, Gene and Carniglia were sentenced to 50 years in prison. And they would both end up serving, obviously, around 28 years. Were you aware of their legal problems in 1983?
Yes, I was. I was definitely aware of it. Um, they wanted to take a plea, and John, for some reason or another, had made his own rule. It's not a Cosa Nostra rule. There's hundreds of guys who took pleas. But John said that's a rat move. And why he said that was that when you generally take a plea, a lot of times the judge will make you admit that there is a mafia, you're in the mafia, and they'll generally use those tapes against somebody else. So I understand why he didn't want to do that, but those lawyers would say, in other words, I would take a plea. If I robbed something, I would say, okay, I robbed that. But I'm not going to say I'm in the mafia or there is a mafia. So there's no rule against it. It was John's rule that he didn't want them to take a plea. Now, Johnny Carniglia wanted to take a plea. The case was old law. The crime happened under old law. And by the time they were sentenced and went to trial, it almost became new law. So he had a shot of taking a plea under the old law. He would have got about 10, 12 years, I think, the most. An old law, you did about 50, 60% of your time. New law, number one, it's 87% of the time. And if they're being sentenced under the new law, the guidelines were much higher than 12 years.
Yeah.
And when you take them to task, they're going to hit you with the max. If you take a plea, they got their conviction, they want to get it out of the way, they'll give you a bottom sentence. So when you're taking them to trial and you lose, and that's why people take pleas. They know they're dead. So Johnny Carniglia was sentenced, Ed and Gene Gotti. They listened to John, and they lost, and they were sentenced to 50 years. And they
So, I mean, this is before John was boss, so this is him kind of doing it as a captain. When he became boss, did he kind of roll that out to everyone in the family that no one takes pleas?
Yes, he did that to a lot of guys. He did this to a guy named Tony Pep, who was a made guy. He was in Florida, and he got busted in Florida, and he was going to take a plea. And John Gotti said, no, take it to trial. And he said, I don't have a shot at trial. I'm so caught, the evidence and everything, I know I'm going to lose. John said, I don't care. Take it to trial. And he didn't say this physically, but he said, fuck you, John. Took the plea anyway and went to jail. John was going to whack him, but it's too late. Took the plea, went to prison, but he refused to listen to John. And there was a lot of controversy about that. I know Johnny Carniglia and Jeannie, when they went into prison, they were really close. First of all, Jeannie was a captain, and Johnny Carniglia was with him. They broke up. John, for some reason, took Jeannie down as a captain. I don't know why, but he did. And Johnny Carniglia didn't get it. He hated the fact what John did, make him take the plea. He hated it. And he didn't stop getting along with Gene Gotti. I guess they were arguing. And Gene Gotti wasn't happy about it either. But I guess it's his brother, and the guy was the boss, and he didn't want to make a big deal out of it. It happened. So he wasn't really complaining too much, but he wasn't happy. But Johnny Carniglia was complaining loudly about it.
Oh, openly to other people. Okay, interesting.
To openly to other people and to Gene Gotti, and he argued with him for not being more, vocal about it.
Yeah.
We should have both been complaining. This is our life. We're not going to admit there's a mafia. We're not going to admit we're made guys, but we're going to take a plea to the indictment, to the crime, period. That's not a rat move. People are doing that all over the country. So
I
That
mean,
was
because the
the
irony is, obviously, back in, I think, what, the early 1970s, 1974, John Gotti actually took a plea himself after the James McBratney hit. Whether that was something I think was arranged by like Roy Cohen, people like that. But
right,
Gotti had actually taken a plea himself in the 70s.
right. I don't know why he changed his thinking about this. Not only did he take a plea, his son took a plea too, way after. After this was the rule. And his son took a plea. So I don't understand. You can't tell guys you have to go to trial. And then if you took a plea, then your son took a plea. I mean, it's so unfair and so wrong. It's pathetic.
Yeah. So in 2009, John Carniglia allegedly sent a letter home from prison, and it said, "If I'd taken a plea in '83, I would have been home 19 years already." And that was in 2009, and he still had another 9 years to go until he was released in June 2018.
Yeah.
So as you're right, if he'd have taken that plea in '83, you'd have got maybe 10 years, 12 years,
And
and
you
that's
do
it.
half the time, you would have did 6, maybe 7 years on the thing, and instead of almost 30 years or 30 years, whatever he got, whatever he did on it, which is a disgrace. And and I, John did certain things at certain times that people in the mob completely didn't understand. This isn't a Cosa Nostra rule. You could take a plea. Guys were taking pleas in other families. So why ain't we allowed when we could take? In other words,
Yeah.
I know I'm dead. I mean, I took pleas too. I don't understand. I didn't say I was a mafia member before I cooperated. I didn't say anything about the mafia. I just took a plea to the charges and got a letter.
Hypothetically speaking, if that trial had been after 1990, when you and John both got pinched, do you think they would have gone against his wishes, although is he still the boss inside? Or do you think they would have been like, right, well, he's locked up, probably for the rest of his life. Maybe we take a plea.
Well, Tony Pep took a plea. I think it was when John was the boss. And he took a
Yeah,
plea in Florida. He didn't give a shit what John said. He went against his orders.
yeah,
And I don't think anybody got mad at Tony Pep either for doing it. And he couldn't do
okay.
anything about it because right after he took a plea, he turned in. He was in jail. What are you going to do? So,
So just a quick question. Obviously, those guys were inside for, I think in them about 28 years. Are they still, if they had money out on the street when they went inside, are they still earning from that? Could they still be earning from things while they're locked up, or does it all dry up for them?
it dried up for them. Um, Gene Gotti and Johnny Koenig had a lot of money into, he was the underboss, Joey Scopa with the Colombo family that had a
Yeah,
very close relationship with him. Uh, this kid, Papa, Jerry Papa's son, I don't remember his first name, but his last name was Papa, killed Joey
John
Scopa.
Papa. It was John.
All right, John Papa,
Yes, John, yeah,
he killed Joey Scopa, and that all dried up now. Because Joey Scopa was actually a guy in another family, but he was helping them a lot with their families and stuff like that. So when he got killed, that dried up too. But their loans, their Shylock money, it basically dried up. And I don't know, there was a lot of hard feelings with the son, John Gotti Jr. A lot of that money kind of disappeared from a lot of people. I mean, I think John Gotti Jr. was very greedy, and he was taking over people's monies. When I cooperated, they took my Shylock business. They took all kinds of things, and yeah, I don't know.
So, as we said, Gene Gotti was a captain at the time of his incarceration. John Carniglia was a soldier. In your opinion, if they'd have taken a plea and come out earlier, would they have risen higher up the ranks? Did they have those kind of qualities, or not so much?
No, they definitely both had those qualities. They both did a lot of work. Um, like I said, I think Gene was the best Gotti that there was. He was, I think, even better than John. He was easy to talk to. He was easy to deal with. He was dangerous, so was Johnny Carneglia, but you were able to deal with them on a man-to-man. It wasn't sick type of shit. So, and both of them were fair with people. When you have those qualities and you're a tough guy, yeah, they both would have elevated very easily. Like I said, Genie was already a captain. He could have went further. I'm sure that Johnny Carneglia could have became a captain very easily, especially if Genie excelled, let's say, to the cause he had a family. Johnny Carneglia would have took that spot for sure. Nobody under him would have fit that spot better than him. His big problem was his brother, but everybody put that on the side. Even he put his brother a little on the side because he didn't bring him around. You didn't see him much or anything like that. So that wasn't his problem.
So they've both been released in, I think, around 2018. Obviously getting on in age a bit. I think it was in their late 70s. Are they retired now? Is it? Because there's always myth that you can't retire, or do you think they're kind of active in the life at all? What's your thoughts?
No, I think they left the life. They had enough of it. 20-something years, almost 30 years. They had enough of it. I know Gene Gotti didn't have sons. I think he had 2 daughters who were married. He had kids. He quit. I'm done. I've had it. He never got money. I know that I complained one time about me making money, and his family was empty. So he was disturbed, and he used me as an example that I was making money under John, and while he was in prison, his families didn't get shit. And I think Johnny Carneglia was the same exact thing, especially when John went in and John Jr. was running things. They didn't get anything. So I believe when John Carneglia came out, I think he did the same thing. He wanted nothing to do with the mafia anymore. You know, it's not just fear of prison or stuff like that. When you're betrayed over and over, you kind of lose the feeling towards the mafia. And I saw that with a lot of guys. You know, so it's not some of these guys who cooperated, you know, they didn't cooperate, but some guys who cooperated, I've seen that many times, how they stood up for a while or they stood up once or twice. Then they were, you know, shanghaied out of different situations or money. And they didn't want nothing to do with the life anymore. And I believe John Gotti, Gene Gotti, and Johnny Carneglia felt the same way. They didn't want to have anything to do with the mafia anymore. And they're out quite a while now, and I think I'm right. They never try to come back. There was newspaper articles, Gene Gotti's out, he's going to come back.
Yeah.
He didn't come back. He didn't even try to come back. He didn't even want to talk about people. Then he had another problem. If he wanted to come back, whoever was in charge would tell him, okay, listen, you did your time like a fucking man. You did a lot of things in the life. You were a skipper at one time. You can come back. But deal with your nephew, John Jr. John Jr. cooperated. I have 302s and stuff like that. There's no doubt he cooperated. He even ratted on Angelo and a whole bunch of people. There's no doubt that he's a cooperator. So they would have told him, straighten that out first. And straighten it out first means kill him. If you're so against people who ratted, then your nephew ratted. Kill him. And then you could come back. There was a couple of issues in prisons, so he would have had to clear up, and he would have had to kill his nephew. So I think he just left. He had enough, and coming back and doing all that shit, that's it. I quit. I think that's what he did. And I gave him a lot of respect for that. And the same thing with Johnny Carneglia. He had enough. He's got a brain. He's a smart guy. He could easily open up a little business, whatever, something. He was a talented guy. He wasn't a stupid guy. And I think that's what he did from what I understand. I had no actual contact with them, but I understand that from people who were very close to them. Both of them quit. and they really never got back in together again.
And is
That
your
argument that they had about the plea stuck with them.
and is your understanding they sit in the Brooklyn area then?
Well, I don't think Jeannie don't live in the Brooklyn. I don't know where Johnny Carneglia is, but Jeannie lived. I think I had a house in Long Island. I think, and
Okay.
that's what I think he is now. I'm not sure. This is hypothetical stuff, but I
Yeah.
think he's in Long Island with his family, his children, his grandchildren. He's done. My opinion.